Hello, bass family. Welcome to Everything Bass. So, I was thinking the other day that, I saw a post, someone who had been to the Mount Rushmore, which if you're not from America, and you probably know because it's iconic, but we carved four of our founding fathers into a mountain, and it's amazing artwork actually, but it's bigger than life, and it's a tribute to these four people that helped build America. But it got me thinking, who would be on my bass Mount Rushmore? Who would be the four bassists I would put on my personal Mount Rushmore? Now, and the reason I say my personal, because I've shied away from doing lists like this because they seem to create sometimes arguments in comment sections on other channels that I followed. So I want to first, I don't want arguments. So mine, show you the criteria I did when I selected four. Believe me, it was hard. I've been working on this for weeks to pick four bass players I would put on my Mount Rushmore. But maybe yours will be different. And yours could maybe introduce your family members to like a bass player they don't know. And that's what's exciting. So I encourage you in the comments below, after you hear my four, let me know what you think of mine. And then how would you make it different? Now, I'm going to give you the criteria I used for choosing my four Mount Rushmore bass players. And the criteria I used was who were most influential to me as an electric bassist, an upright bassist, a fretless bassist, and a studio bassist. So that was my criteria. You can have your own criteria. Maybe you want to do your four Mount Rushmore bassists for blues bassists, or four Mount Rushmore bassists for death metal bassists. Remember, there's no restriction. But I'm dying to know, like, and it's harder than you might think, because that's only four, and I love so many bass players in the world. So I went back to thinking about my early years, and I said, okay, in my early years, who was the electric bassist that was most influential, got me past like maybe to the next level, and encouraged and continues to inspire me today. So my first inductee to my Mount Rushmore Bassist Hall of Fame is Stanley Clarke. I'm 53 at the time of recording this. Actually, next week I'll be 54. Man, Stanley came on the scene and changed so much, and it was like a one moment that expanded bass. I know if you're a younger player, you've benefited of many decades of bass players just expanding our world and bringing new ideas and getting into the forefront. Because a lot of times we were the bass players in the photos that you could just see us from the knees down on stage because the spotlight was on the singer and the spotlight just caught our knees down. And guys like Stanley Clarke changed that. And also, man, once Stanley Clarke came out with his solo albums, really with his solo albums, is when I saw, because I was working at a guitar store at the time, when I saw bass sales go up. So he was inspiring people to take up bass, and that's why he's on mine. So I first came to know him through his solo albums, but then going back to Return to Forever, the band he was in, iconic band, wow, and actually has continued to do like reunion gigs and done more recent things with them. But yeah, Stanley, and yes, I know Stanley plays upright brilliantly, and I'm a big fan of his upright playing. But in this case, I'm choosing him for electric because, I mean, he drove what I do a lot on slap, and his compositions, his soundtrack work. There's been movies I've seen, I didn't really particularly like the movie, but his soundtrack work was worth the price of admission by far. And of course, he's done so many cool things with like Stuart Copeland, and I mean, I'm gonna forget because he's just always reinventing himself. He's doing very cool things. I was honored to see him a couple times live, and he was just a big motivator for me. So my first Mount Rushmore bassist, Stanley Clarke. For the upright bassist, it might be a little surprise to you guys because I don't think he's someone that everyone goes to, but for me, especially coming from a very narrow-minded view. I was really a rock and metal bassist. I love rock and metal, and when I went to MI, I got expanded. My experience expanded to understanding and appreciating all styles of music, And when it came to jazz, there was one upright player that just spoke to my sensibilities. I loved his bass playing. I loved his soloing. And that bass player is, and my upright bass Mount Rushmore inductee is Scott LaFaro. I first came to hear Scott with his great playing with Bill Evans. But as I got to know him as a player, and unfortunately he was taken from us way too early in a cab accident, I believe, in a taxi cab accident in New York. And that's just sad to me because he was so influential. So then, since I couldn't expect new material from him, I went back to old material. And I found recordings with Chet Baker, Stan Kenton, Benny Goodman, Ornette Coleman. So Scott LaFaro, you guys have to check him out. And I'm going to kind of even skew this to a particular part of the audience right now. If you are a metal guy or a rock guy, a funk guy, and jazz doesn't really do it for you, but you kind of wish it did, check out any of the Bill Evans trio that Scott's on. And you can find him easy enough on a lot of the different streaming services. And really listen to what he's doing on the upright. To me, he was exciting. Oh man, it's funny, I'm actually getting a little depressed because he didn't get to live his full life out and didn't get to do, stacks of recordings, and I never got to see him live, obviously. But he is the upright bass player that I'm putting on my Mount Rushmore. Okay, so that gets me to fretless. No surprise here. Let's all say it together. 1, 2, 3, Jaco Pastorius. I mean, well, of course, I'm not going to put any kind of judgment on you. You might have a fretless player that influenced you more. But for me, in my development, and especially at the time, so you guys remember, I started playing music in the late 70s. I started playing bass in the 80s. And Jaco came along with this big, Stanley Clarke, Jaco, Jeff Berlin, all these guys hit, and it was like instantaneously an atom bomb of musical creativity applied to derived from the bass was just dropped on the world, and the bass was just absolutely changed. And Jaco, man, that fretless bass, it just changed everything. It changed the world. His solo albums, his stuff with Weather Report, I mean, anything. Joni Mitchell, the stuff he did with Joni Mitchell alone, holy cow. But check it out. It's funny. Sometimes students I've had in the past, when we talk about fretless bass, is like, oh, it's just such a wimpy instrument. No. And believe me, I told them, no way. It's not wimpy. Check out Jaco. It's got fire. It's electricity coming from that instrument. And that's what I took away from it. His solo compositions are amazing. It's funny. I love the way he plays like Latin grooves. I mean, it's exciting to me. It's so, there's so much life in his playing, and still to this day, man, love it. I love it so much. Now, for my studio bass player, so let's do a little review. Electric bass player Stanley Clarke. Right next to him on the mountain, carved into the mountain, Scott LaFaro. Right next to him, Jaco Pastorius, my studio bassist. Man, there's a lot of great ones out there, and I really struggled over this one more than any other. In fact, I'm going to call an audible. This is crazy. I didn't think I'd do this. I was so prepared to say one name, but I'm going to flip-flop, which means all my notes over here are not, I'm going to speak just from the heart. My Mount Rushmore studio bass player is Jim Lacefield. And if you don't know who he is, it's because most of his career, he was a studio bass player. And I don't know if this is true. I can't fact check it, but when I was a student at Musicians Institute, Jim Lacefield was a teacher there, one of my favorite teachers. And someone told me on staff, said that he was at that time was the most recorded bass player in history. And one of the reasons why is he was doing everything for all the major movie studios. So Paramount, Universal, 20th Century Fox, all this. He was doing TV shows every day. He was doing album dates. It was amazing. I saw one time he brought in, as an example, he wanted us to see like what an example of a resume, because back then resumes were very important. If you were going to a studio, you reach out to a talent agent, to a band, it was important to show your playing experience. And his was multiple pages, and even then it said like notable movie soundtracks, notable live recordings, notable, because he couldn't, it would be a book. It would be a book. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. And those of you who know Jim Lacefield can back me up on this. thousands of recording dates he did. Thousands. Yeah, Jim Lacefield also had a great band with Mike Miller on guitar, Ralph Humphrey on drums, called the Outside Men. Now, it's hard to find. I only have it on cassette, but I might try to dig out because you have these three giants on their instruments, guitar, bass, and drum trio, playing stuff that's just so mind-melting, and it's great because we'd go see concerts of Jim playing with the Outside Men, and in the audience, I'm not going to name names, in the audience were iconic musicians, guys that were there because this was the band they wanted to see. I mean, that was the kind of respect that Jim Lacefield had. So I'm changing my thing, and I'm not going to say who I don't want to disparage the person I chose before. So right now, my four members are Stanley Clarke, Scott LaFaro, Jaco Pastorius, and Jim Lacefield. And that's my Mount Rushmore. And it's not any better than your Mount Rushmore. But I'm dying to know, guys. I mean, think about it. I changed mid-video my studio choice because it's been that tough. But now it feels right. I feel right because actually Jim had a direct influence on me because I was a student of his. But what's yours? And don't feel you have to do my criteria. Do your own. Do, all electric bass players, all upright bass players. I don't care. Just who would you put on this? But try to tell us why. I'm dying to know, man. This is like, of all the videos I posted, this is the comment section I'm dying to know because it was hard to just pick out four bass players that I put on my Mount Rushmore. And I didn't prepare an encore item because for lists, I don't usually do encore items. But for this encore item, I'm going to tell you a story about Jim Lacefield. And maybe this will help you if you're currently going to music school or not. But I shared this after graduating from MI, I became a teacher and a counselor at MI. And as a counselor, sometimes students would think a teacher didn't like them very much and, they're button heads and whatnot. And I would tell this story. So Jim Lacefield he taught studio bass, he taught Fusion Pro Series, he did open counselings, which were a chance to sit in small groups and ask any questions. But he always was focused on his open counselings, and he would give us assignments, and he'd give all of us, do this, and then we would come back the week later, and those of us who survived would come back and show him what we did. And man, I was really feeling like I'm just not quite getting everything out of his stuff. So I'd go to an open counseling, he would give me a chart, and I would really work on it, or he'd give me an assignment, essentially a chart. I'd work on it for the week, I'd come back and I'd demonstrate, and he'd go, all right, okay, well, here's what I would do differently. So I was like, I really want to show him that I can do this. So there was one particular jazz walking exercise. He had me writing jazz walking bass lines. I went home and in addition to all my other work, I poured into this thing, man. I just really worked on it. I worked on it. And I could play it frontwards and back, man. And so I came in there feeling pretty good. So, and by this time, it was late in the semester, and a lot of people had stopped coming because it was a hard open counseling. Well, I sat down, and he's like, what do you got for me? And I played it, and he was like, okay, well, here's what I want you to do. And I did the stupidest thing anyone could do because I don't know what I expected, but he didn't really acknowledge that I kicked its butt, He just went, okay, and here's what I want you to do. So I said, man, is that all? And he's like, he just looked at me like I can just see him now. He kind of like, what do you mean? Is that all? I'm like, well, I mean, I killed that. And he's like, Dale, and I'm going to take out the cuss word. Dale, you're paying me to be your teacher, not your cheerleader. I actually almost said the cuss word. So he said, you're paying me to be your teacher, not your cheerleader. And that was like, oh man. I left there thinking, he does not like me one bit. Then there'd be a lot of times I'd be trying to sneak out because he would kind of conducted this Fusion Pro Series where you would have all these icons, Ralph Humphreys, Mike Miller, all these genius fusion players, these guys that are out there top of the game. They would play a little fusion concert, and then you as a student would get up and they would kind of mentor you, and you would play the same thing. And I was so intimidated by him. I didn't want to, and so I would try to sneak out. And he also did the odd meter LPW. So I'd be trying to sneak out, and he would see me like, Dale, no, come here. And I'd play, and I'd fall flat on my face, and he would never yell at me, but he would just like, no, okay, do this. And so I swore and told many of my classmates, Jim Lacefield does not like me. So let's fast forward to graduation day. I'm graduating at MI, and we were at the Palladium in Hollywood. It was awesome, and you got to walk across the stage, and a lot of the bass counselors or bass teachers were up there. And the last in line was Jim Lacefield. So you'd go up and shake hands, and they'd say nice things. And I mean, look at these guys. I was able to say goodbye and thank Gary Willis, Paul Farnan, Steve Bailey. I mean, I'm gonna forget guys, but so all these guys. And at the end, there's Jim Lacefield. And when I went up to shake his hand, and I was gonna shake his hand because I learned a crap ton. Sorry, I learned a lot from him. And Jim puts his hands on my shoulders, and he goes, "I'm so proud of you." And I was like, and I remember saying, like, I didn't have much of a governor on what I'd say. I just spoke my mind, and I just said, "Oh, did you say that to everybody?" And I think I hurt his feelings. And he pulled out of line. So he stepped out of line, which means the next couple guys, he didn't shake their hands, not because he didn't want to, but he really was shocked that I said that. He's like, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, oh, I didn't think you liked me. And he's like, no, dude, you came back every time. No matter what I put you through, you came back. You never gave up. I'm proud of you. And I mean, I had tears in my eyes because here's a teacher I thought didn't care about me, didn't like me. When I found out later is he loved me. He just wanted to keep feeding me. And he was thankful that I was coming every time. So if you're a student at a music school right now, or forget that, if you're a student at a school and this teacher doesn't seem to like you and is hard on you, maybe that teacher loves you the most because they care about you. You know, and so anyway, fast forward, just a couple months later, I was offered a job at MI. And one thing I found out after being hired was that Jim Lacefield was one of my loudest supporters. He actually, you know, went to the school and said, no, this is the guy you should need to hire. So the reason I'm emotional right now about this is a couple years later, Jim passed away. And it was early. He like Scott LaFaro, he had so much more music, and it really was really hard. And actually, I told that story about the cheerleader teacher thing at his memorial service, and it made people laugh because that's who Jim was, man. Anyway, what's your Mount Rushmore? Let me know, and maybe share some stories. Why would you put he or she on your mountain? What do they mean to you? Go as deep as you want to go, man. Because this is like, again, I'm looking forward to these comments. So please share them. In the very least, like, share, subscribe to the videos. Thank you for the support of the channel. I'll be doing more lists like this. I did one on the Facebook group for Everything Bass, and people are like, you need to do videos for this. And so I'm listening and I'm doing. So my first Mount Rushmore. These are my 4. What are your 4? And share them. I look forward to them. And guys, I really love you. At the time of recording, the world's going through the coronavirus thing. So being able to just focus on you and focus on these lessons is something that I am so thankful for. So love you guys. You mean the world to me. And I will see you at the next video.